The past hides many secrets, and here, we're going to uncover them. Join us on this epic historical journey. With its powerful pharaohs, many gods, and incredible art, it's easy to think that ancient Egypt was always strong and successful. But that wasn't always the case. There were also darker times, conflicts, civil wars, famines, and a general feeling of collapse. The only way to survive was through resilience and strong leadership. Enter Senusret III, who ruled Egypt nearly 4,000 years ago. He was strong and muscular. Everything a pharaoh was expected to be.
But take a look at my face. My grim expression has been interpreted as a sign of the tough times I ruled through, and my large ears as a symbol of my ability to hear any plots against me.
Senusret represents how Egypt's kings ruled during these unstable periods. He kept enemies at bay through a mix of military forts and magical curses. But this was a new era in Egyptian history, one ruled not just by military power, but by fear and suspicion. These were some of Egypt's darkest days, a time when its entire civilization stood on the brink of collapse. We've already explored how this ancient culture began thousands of years ago, blessed by the Nile, rich natural resources, and a society united by complex beliefs. But in this episode, we'll see how the great confidence of the Pyramid Age didn't last. The Dark Age that followed pushed the civilization to the edge of extinction. Make no mistake, this is the land of the dead, and we're standing among them. These were times of famine, civil war, and chaos. Kings were reduced to mere figureheads. But ironically, this collapse sparked one of the greatest comebacks in ancient history. Egypt rose again, stronger and richer than ever. Let's go to Saqqara, the starting point of the Pyramid Age. Among its many wonders is evidence of a lesser-known part of Egypt's story, its descent into a dark age. The peak of Egypt's Old Kingdom was marked by the Great Pyramid of Giza, but just 200 years later, King Unas built something very different. Today it might not look like much, but the causeway of Unas pyramid complex is one of its standout features. It's 750 meters long and symbolically connects life and death, stretching from the Nile Valley up to the desert plateau and the foot of his pyramid. It was likely used for his funeral procession, but it might also have been designed to channel the life-giving power of the Nile to the city of the dead here in Saqqara. There's a narrow slit in the ceiling that once let in just enough light. But what's remarkable is that this causeway had one specific purpose: the king's funeral procession. Along its walls are scenes showing two sides of life, order and chaos. At first, we see an ideal version of Egypt, a time of abundance. These are typical scenes you'd find in temples or tombs, displays of Egypt's wealth, fruits, vegetables, crops, meat, fish, all the riches of nature brought into the land through the king's blessings. The king was seen as the bringer of prosperity, the link between the gods and the people. But deeper down the causeway, the story shifts. There's something disturbing here, evidence of dark forces at work. One scene is so unsettling that it's now kept in the Saqqara Museum. It's one of the most haunting pieces of art from ancient Egypt. It shows two rows of starving famine victims, emaciated, weak, and collapsing. They suffer and fall, and in that image, Egypt is confronting the harsh truth. This was real suffering. It's believed these victims represent desert nomads, people who lived on Egypt's fringes. It's as if the chaos and suffering were creeping closer to the Nile Valley. Egypt was waking up to the fact that disorder wasn't far off. This is a rare moment in Egyptian art, chaos shown as actual human suffering, not just magical battles between gods. Here, it's real. Through these realistic images, Egyptians were essentially crying out to the gods, asking them to push away the forces of chaos. But instead, the starving victims became an ominous sign of things to come. Up to this point, Egypt had flourished because of its one great natural gift, the Nile River. The annual Nile floods enriched the soil, making it possible for life and farming to thrive. This natural abundance was the foundation on which Egypt and its long-lasting global system was built. But that lifeblood was about to run dry. Evidence shows that by the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, the level of the Nile's flooding dropped dramatically. The very thing that had sustained Egypt's life began to fade. The Egyptians believed their gods were abandoning them. Over the next 100 years, ancient texts spoke of hunger, starvation, and even cannibalism. Egyptian society was deeply rooted in the belief that its kings had divine power. Without that belief, the Pyramid Age could never have existed. But now, in a time of crisis, the king seemed increasingly powerless in the face of natural disaster. This came to a head with a ruler well past his prime, King Pepi II, who was said to have lived for 100 years, the longest reign of any Egyptian pharaoh. This area was once a ceremonial running track, the kind of place where Pepi would have had to physically prove his strength to his people. When a pharaoh reached 30 years on the throne, he had to perform a special jubilee ritual. This included running 4 laps around the track as king of the north, and 4 more as king of the south, a public display of his power and right to rule. It was the ultimate way of saying, "I'm still in charge." But by the time Pepi got old, this became a problem. Of course, if he had been younger and in shape, the ceremony would have been a powerful celebration. But poor Pepi, now in his 90s, clearly couldn't live up to the role of a living god. This really shook the entire idea of what it meant to be a pharaoh. People could see it. He wasn't divine, just old and frail. And when natural disaster struck, the blame fell on him. This mix of weak leadership and failed harvests sent Egypt into a steep decline. Ancient Egypt now faced its first major political crisis. The pharaoh's supposed godlike status, so central to the Pyramid Age, was falling apart. The unity that once held society together began to break down, and Egypt slid into a dark age. And with this breakdown, a new kind of ruler began to rise. Not a single king, but multiple warlords. We actually know a lot about one of these new leaders, thanks to a detailed autobiography he left carved into the rock wall of his tomb in Moala, far off the usual tourist trail. His name was Anktifi. Now, Anktifi started out as a minor official but worked his way up to become a regional governor, known as a nomarch. As central government fell apart, powerful local figures like Anktifi filled the power vacuum. His tomb might seem modest by ancient Egyptian standards, but its walls tell the story of his rise to power.
You can see the man himself, this big grey figure with the incredible hairstyle. I actually like him already. He's got a great tomb too.
The hieroglyphs and images covering the walls show how Anktifi took advantage of the collapse at the end of the Pyramid Age. The role of the pharaoh had been reduced to almost a footnote. In fact, the only place the king's name appears in the entire tomb is in a tiny little cartouche, barely noticeable. It's so small, it's like it's written on the tip of someone's toe. That's how insignificant the pharaoh had become.
I didn't bother to say the king told me to do this, or by the king's order. I acted on my own, which was highly unusual at the time.
Just that tiny cartouche says so much about this entire era. Kings were shrinking in importance, while local rulers were taking center stage. Anktifi was building his political career, and he wanted to make sure the gods knew how important he was too. The elegant, formal language once reserved for kings had now become part of Anktifi's personal propaganda. He was obsessed with his own greatness. In his inscriptions, he calls himself a hero like no other.
I'm a hero without equal,
he says again and again. Nearly every inscription ends with some version of that line. So what did he do to justify all this bragging? He claimed he helped the people during a time of drought and famine. According to the texts, he fed the hungry, helped the sick, gave bread to those without food, ointment to those without medicine, sandals to the barefoot, even wives to the unmarried. He's basically painting a picture of chaos, and himself as the one who restored order. The worse he makes the crisis sound, the more impressive he looks for fixing it.
The whole South was starving,
the text says. He even describes it with vivid hieroglyphs, like a man falling onto a corpse. It's dramatic. And then it gets even darker. Anktifi claims people were so desperate they ate their own children.
But not in my region, not in Khnum where I ruled. Everything was fine there.
At the same time, he was also a military leader. Another section of the tomb talks about his prowess in battle. In his biggest boast, Enkhtifi claims almost godlike status.
I am the beginning and the end of humanity. There has never been anyone like me and never will be.
In this Egyptian Dark Age, warlords like Enkhtifi had replaced the old pharaohs. His delusions of grandeur, carved all over his tomb, are even more striking when you step outside and see where he chose to be buried, in a cliff that resembles a natural pyramid. He wanted to be seen as a local pharaoh, and in many ways, he was. Because the one who fed the people, protected them, and led them was the one who ruled them too. At the very heart of this battlefield lay Egypt's most sacred site, its oldest royal cemetery, a place that still holds a haunting, powerful atmosphere today. This was the final resting place of Egypt's earliest kings, whose mummified bodies were buried in elaborate tombs beneath the desert floor. They believed this was a safe place for their souls to rest for eternity. But the conflict between the two factions was about to reach a horrifying new low. One of the most violent events was later recorded in ancient texts as a shocking act of sacrilege, a disgraceful attack carried out by the northern warlords in their battle against the southerners. Their troops burned the royal tombs, desecrating the graves and destroying the mummies inside. In one brutal moment, Egypt lost its physical connection to its ancient royal past. The Egyptians were horrified. Even the northern kings later deeply regretted what their armies had done. But the damage was irreversible. The royal legacy of ancient Egypt was lost forever. The problem with moments like this, from an archaeologist's perspective, is that very little survives for us to study. And yet, if you know what to look for, there are still traces of this devastation. What remains today at the site of this royal burial ground is incredible. Thousands upon thousands of broken pottery shards. Most of them aren't from the destruction itself, they're from centuries of people coming here to atone for that loss. Shortly after the desecration, this sacred site became a place of pilgrimage. People came bringing small pots filled with food, drink, and incense, offerings to the spirits of the kings buried here. The Egyptians believed that upon death, the spirits of these kings joined the god Osiris, lord of the underworld. By making offerings at this site, the people of Egypt were essentially trying to make amends for the sins of the past. After the physical remains were destroyed, all they had left was the spiritual link to their royal ancestors. But that sacrilege soon provoked a powerful backlash. Across the desert from Abydos lay Thebes, the stronghold of the southern warlords. And now, they rose up in force, determined to reunite Egypt. Around 2000 BCE, Thebes was just a small donkey town. But the warlords there had two big advantages over their rivals. First, they lived on a strategic bend of the Nile known as the Cana Bend, which gave them control over fertile farmland. Second, their local god was Montu, the god of war. It was the warlords of Thebes who eventually reunified Egypt, and one of them stood out above the rest.
His name is carved into the walls of the Theban tomb complex, and that name says a lot. Montuhotep.
That name means Montu is satisfied, or put simply, the god of war is pleased.
If the god of war is happy with someone, it means that person must be a formidable military leader.
There's a stunning scene in the tomb. You can see Montuhotep surrounded by hands, gods embracing him, both from behind and in front. One of them even gives him the breath of life, infusing him with divine power. This was the power of victory, and it brought an end to Egypt's first intermediate period, the first dark age in its history.
Montuhotep lived up to his name as the son of the war god. He marched his armies northward, defeated the northern rulers, and reunified Egypt.
And perhaps the most symbolic moment of all, he put on the red crown, the crown of the north.
I may be from Thebes, he seemed to say. I may wear the white crown of the south, but now look at me. I wear both crowns. I am king of all Egypt.
And so, Montuhotep became Montuhotep II, the pharaoh who restored Egypt's unity. But that victory came with a heavy cost. We can still see the aftermath today on the west bank of Thebes at Deir el-Bahari. In a tomb there, archaeologists in 1923 uncovered the remains of Montuhotep's soldiers, their bodies silently testifying to the horrors of Egypt's civil war 4,000 years ago. Detailed analysis has revealed the brutal conditions they endured. So while Montuhotep won the war and reunited Egypt, the price was paid in blood by the warriors who fought to make it happen. These are the original excavation photos of the tomb, and the bodies inside had been naturally preserved, mummified by Egypt's hot, dry climate. Their skin and hair are still intact, and most importantly, the remains show clear evidence of how these men fought and died. Some of the bodies were pierced with arrows, one shot straight into the left side of the chest. Others were found still wearing leather wrist guards, the kind used by archers. 10 of the soldiers were killed by arrows tipped with ebony wood. But in other cases, the violence was even more brutal. You can see on one body where someone was struck in the head, hard. There's a clear area of trauma. This wasn't just a wound, it was a savage blow. After a barrage of angry strikes, these poor men were left helpless on the battlefield, and vultures picked at their corpses. The damage is horrifying and deeply moving. The bodies show clear signs of the weapons used against them: arrows, slings, even rocks thrown from above. Eventually, their bodies were collected from the battlefield, carefully wrapped in linen and buried. The linen carried the seal of the Theban tomb complex, belonging to their leader, Montuhotep. But just as important as the bodies themselves is where Montuhotep chose to bury them. Today, their final resting place is a sealed and anonymous tomb, but 4,000 years ago, Montuhotep honored his fallen soldiers by laying them to rest among the tombs of his highest officials. He turned the burial into a monument to victory. In doing so, Egypt's new king created what may be the first known war cemetery in the world. Now, I've been granted special permission to see Montuhotep's soldiers for the very first time. A crew is even knocking down part of the tomb wall for me, so I'll be face to face with the very people who fought in Egypt's civil war around 2000 BCE. I'm incredibly excited. And it was this same sense of wonder that led a team of American archaeologists to excavate the original mass graves in the first place. Today, Montuhotep's soldiers have been reburied in a nearby tomb, rarely exposed to daylight since their discovery over 90 years ago. Now, this is actually a bit frustrating. I really want to go inside right now, but for health and safety reasons, I can't just walk in. The tomb has been sealed for so long that the air is stale and possibly dangerous, filled with fungal spores, bacteria, and other harmful stuff. Early Egyptologists often rushed straight in, risking what people called the Pharaoh's curse. But we're more careful now. A bit of patience is necessary. I can't believe we're finally going in. This is one of those rare moments you dream of when you work in Egyptology. A tomb that's hardly ever been visited. We had to knock down a wall to get in, and no one knows exactly what we'll find inside. Honestly, this is nothing like what I expected. Nobody really knew what to expect. It's stunning. I've never been inside a tomb like this before. Good thing I'm wearing a protective mask. There's all sorts of stuff floating in the air, not just ancient dust, but possibly human dust too. This place deserves our full respect. It's carved from solid rock, and while the walls are unfinished, it's typical of the kind of tombs built for officials and royal courtiers throughout these cliffs. Wow, that's a charred mummy. It's absolutely incredible. And if you look along the length of this long tomb, look at the ground. It's not stone. It's human remains, mummy wrappings, bones, and body fragments. There are rooms and corridors extending further back, all filled with linen bundles from different eras. Some of that linen is said to be the same fabric used to wrap Montuhotep's soldiers, meant to preserve them forever. But at first glance, it's hard to get a clear picture of this tomb's story. It looks like it was reused multiple times throughout Egypt's long history. Over there, you can see a partially preserved human shoulder, the skin folded and dried. There's still a surprising amount of soft tissue. And then it hits you. You're face to face with the dead, no doubt about it. This is their resting place, and now we are among them. It's a powerful and emotional experience. What stands out is just how little is left of their bodies. Like many tombs along the Nile, this one has suffered centuries of looting and destruction. Still, scattered among the linen wrappings, debris, and bones, there are real, tangible remains of these brave men. Subscribe to join us on this journey into forgotten history. Like, comment, and support our mission to uncover the truth behind ancient mysteries. See you in the next